Hi
Yeah,
everyone. Thank you very much indeed. What we thought we would like to do, and let's see if the technology is going to be working in our favour, is just begin with a poll. So the question asks you, to what extent do I want and need to adjust my teaching to take account of a mediation? And the options are a lot, a little, none, or quite reasonably, don't know. So I'm going to launch the poll now. And hopefully everyone can see that. You should have the opportunity to put in your votes. Come on a little. None saying none. That's interesting. That's, I think, very positive. Okay. Right. A little is slowly inching ahead. Or perhaps I should be saying centimetering ahead, given the international nature of the group of people we have in front with us today. Okay, keep coming, keep coming. Okay, so 57% on a little, 43% on a lot, 66% of you have voted, so the third of you who are yet to vote, you've got a few more minutes. I'm going to close the poll in about 10 seconds. So if you haven't voted, now's your time. 5, 4, get your votes in, everyone. Come on. 3, 2, 1. Okay, great. So as I end polling, hopefully you can see that we've got a slight majority of those who polled saying that they feel they want and need to adjust their teaching a little. And just behind them, 43% of those who voted saying that they feel that they want to need and adjust their teaching a lot. Let me share those results with you. But it's great to see that we've got a clear interest in mediation and an adjustment to the way in which we teach. So thank you very much indeed for the questions that have come into the Q&A box. If I look to my side, it's simply because I have two monitors and it's slightly easier for me to have the questions on one monitor and the rest of you on the other one. We've got some questions coming into the chat box as well. Could I just ask, if you have put a question into the chat box, could you just copy and paste it please into Q&A, because that enables the panel in order to see which questions have been answered and to make sure we don't miss anyone out, which we wouldn't want to do. What we'll do is work through these questions, I think, in order. I'll begin with the first question from Hedvig, and then I'll come back to Gabby, who had a very interesting question, and then we'll move back to the Q&A box. So Hedvig, if you would like to come in here now, and your question was about peer teaching and whether that can be considered mediation. If you'd like to put your microphone on, just to understand a little bit more about where you're coming from with that question, please. Hi, Hedvig.
Hi, Neil. Hi, Copy. So, can you hear me?
We can hear you well.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. So, regarding my question about peer teaching is, so as you mentioned, there are 3 elements to mediation in the classroom. And so here we have 2 students, one of them whose level of English may be a little bit better than the others, doesn't understand what's happening, let's say, I mean, oh my God, it has so many aspects because
it does.
And it's just so it can be if we are talking about peer teaching, when the students help each other, let's say, where a stronger and a weaker student are put together.
So if I understand correctly, Hedvig, you're talking about a situation where, for example, if you've got a CLIL lesson where you've got content being dealt with,
exactly.
2 students, one who has a higher level of conceptual understanding, re-explains what the teacher has taught or what the course book has presented to the student who is conceptually weaker.
Exactly.
Absolutely a case of, depending on what it is that is being mediated, this may be the mediation of a text, So they've both read something about, I don't know, molecular biology, about which I know nothing. I'd be the student being explained to. And then the other student kind of comes in either in English or potentially in the L1 and simplifies it, illustrates it, clarifies it. So yes, definitely mediation.
Exactly. Or also like explaining the task itself to start with.
Yeah.
Let's say if it's not clear to one of them, for instance. Definitely. That's what came to my mind, to be honest.
Remember, and this I think comes back to Gabby's question, that with mediation, unlike interaction, mediation has three parts. It has the person, or the recipient, it has the person doing the mediation, and then you have the third element. It might be a text, it might be an idea, it might be information from a lecture, but you must have that third element. Gabby, do you want to come in now with your question? Because I think that will illustrate the difference between mediation and interaction, and might help illustrate Hedvig's points as well. I think you're muted, Gabby.
Okay, right. Thank you, Neil. I mean, I have to say that I am actually more concerned with the difference between mediation and explanation.
Okay.
So not as much interaction as explanation, because I mean, so far I can't see the difference between mediation, a student mediating something to another student, and a student explaining something to another student.
If we go back to that slide which had the list of verbs, let me see if I can find it in my paper copy whilst I'm speaking. Explanation is, if you like, an act of clarification. And therefore, yes, very definitely, this would be an example of mediation. Because what is being mediated, what is being explained, is something external to the person doing the mediating.
So I'm assuming mediation is just a broader concept. Yes. So explanation is part of mediation, but mediation has something else to offer, right?
Yes. So in fact, looking at the slide, and we look at the domains of language, language level, subject knowledge, interestingly, the first verb that occurs with subject knowledge as an act of mediation is that explanation. Now, imagine that I am appearing in this webinar, but instead of wearing a blue shirt, I was wearing a kaftan. And I might explain to someone at the beginning of the presentation, I've chosen to wear a kaftan today because that would be me explaining something about myself. So effectively, there are only two elements involved. So explanation can be an interactive task, or if it involves the external as well, then it becomes a mediation task. But yes, very often when we explain something external to ourselves to another person, absolutely it's an act of mediation.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, okay.
I have another really big question, Neil, but I think I'll leave it for later when we get some more ideas from other attendees.
Sufyan, you have two questions, one about the relationship between mediation and then learning styles, and the other one, a really big one, about how can it be assessed. Sufyan, if you'd like to come on live, and I'll do my best to answer those questions for you. I'm not sure if Sufyan is able to join us.
Maybe she just doesn't want to speak.
Okay, no problem.
You know, some people are shy, so.
Okay, so the reliance of, does mediation rely on differentiation or learning styles? I think going back to Hedvig's first question, where you could argue that in terms of differentiation, in terms of levels, or differentiation in terms of explanation of concepts, that yes, a student, where you've got a multi-level class, where you've got a student with a higher conceptual understanding helping a student of a lower level of understanding, then yes, mediation can help in terms of bridging that multi-level structure of your class. So where you've got differentiation taking place, the student becomes the mediator. In terms of learning styles, my hesitation here comes from my innate uncertainty about the academic validity of learning styles. And I think really we want to just unpick what do we mean about learning styles. A few years ago, people were very interested in, you know, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory, those 5 senses. I think pretty much those have been debunked as a neuromyth. Yes, there is a sense that students may have a preference. You know, some students say, can I see a picture rather than a text? But there is very little evidence to suggest that the teacher who changes the way that they teach in order to meet the so-called learning preferences, the learning styles of the students, has any real impact on learning. So you could mediate from a visual style to an auditory style by, for example, presenting students with a IELTS Task 1 graph and asking them to talk about it to another student who listens to what is said and then writes some notes. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend using mediation as a way of working with differences in learning styles, because I don't think actually learning styles is the point here. Do come back to me if you like regarding a clarification. There's an act of mediation by what you mean by learning styles, but I hope that clarifies things for you. Jumping to
Neil, can I just, sorry, because that's, I have a question that just came to me when you were talking. You said a higher level, or a student with a higher level understanding mediates something to a student with a lower level understanding of understanding. Is this always the pattern? Is this always the same? Can it not be the other way around? Can a student with a lower level of understanding be the mediator in this communication with a student who has a higher level of understanding?
There is no hard and fast rule about who mediates for whom. If we think about authenticity, realistically in the real world, if you know, think about parents, teachers, they have that higher level of comprehension and they mediate for people who are younger than them, have a lower level comprehension. But of course, I think we don't want to pigeonhole students. We don't want to pigeonhole the student with the lower linguistic level or the lower processing understanding level as being the one who needs to be mediated to and for. So I think absolutely, let's empower all of our students to use the mediation skill. And to an extent, I don't want to over-labor the point of the higher to the lower level. That is one example, but it very definitely isn't the only one. And in fact, I think if you want to build confidence in the classroom, there is, again, by bringing in L2 and, sorry, bringing in L1, if the weaker L2 speaker mediates through L1, then they can demonstrate understanding very clearly. And so, you know, they may be a fantastic listener, but just struggle with speaking. And if your focus is on checking understanding of listening, why not bring in L2 and they explain, clarify, illustrate using their first language as a proof of their understanding of what they heard in L2. So yes, it can work either way or indeed both ways.
Thank you.
Great. Sufyan, coming to your question, then we'll come back to Hedvig. How can mediation be assessed? Very good question. And I think this is something which is emergent. I made reference to the video, which is available on YouTube, where you have 3 experts from Cambridge Assessment English talking about mediation. And you will actually hear them talking about the work that's taking place by some of the research teams, looking at ways in which mediation can be assessed and whether it should become a specific assessment criterion, or perhaps there should be a specific exam to test it. And I think the jury is out on this one. It's new. I'm not aware of any exams that specifically have a mediation criterion. If anyone here is aware of one, please put your comments into chat, please. I think it may happen, but it's a case of watch this space. In terms of how you do it, then I would suggest that don't be frightened if exams aren't doing it right now, because I think if we use that EAP example that we had in the live presentation, you can actually informally assess mediation through a lecture course in EAP, by which what you do is you ask the students to take notes during the lecture. You then ask them in a different color pen to annotate what they got when they got into their little buzz groups and the information that they were able to take from someone else. The information they're taking from their peers is an act of mediation, and you can mark by looking at their re-annotations of their live listening lecture notes and mark that. And in fact, that's something that I was involved in marking when I was involved in a UK Swansea University pre-sessional course. So it can be assessed. In terms of assessing speaking, I would actually pass it back to the students. That example of ESP where you had the doctor, the nurse and the patient, and then the fourth person fed back on the quality of the mediation. Because I think it's quite difficult to reflect on what you've just said in real time. If you've got a fourth person saying, I really like the way you helped the patient to understand that a myocardial infarction is actually a heart attack, and that was a very nice bit of register change. So yes, I think it can be done. For public exams, probably a couple of years away. Certainly Cambridge, when I spoke to them a couple of weeks ago, weren't able to say of any specific mediation criteria that they'd be introducing soon, but I think getting the students to do it for each other would work very, very well. So if we come back to, I'm aware that I want to get as many different people's answers as possible. So Hedvig, if I can take your two questions at the top here together. You ask, how the use of mediation may or will change our lessons. I think that was answered by the poll that, of those who were polled, half thought it would change their lessons a little, and just under half thought it might change them a lot. So I think it's not about a major change, it's more about a change in shift of perspective. In terms of how we prepare, then I'd say move away from opportunities of a student talking to a student, and then have either a student talking to a student about something else, or three students talking to one another. So, student A talks to student B, and student C reports back, clarifies it, exemplifies it, simplifies it. Can we expect modifications, major or minor, to our existing language exams? I think pretty much covered already. Yes, I think we can expect changes, but probably more easy to introduce changes in the classroom and then see what happens. However, the rewrite of the A2 Cambridge key exam, in fact, introduces mediation into the interactive task. So it's beginning to happen already. I'd like to come to Maria Giuseppa Pujol Toda Twinam. I hope I pronounced your name correctly there, Maria. I don't know if you'd like to come on live. You've raised your hand. Oh, Maria, I think you're coming through. Hi there, Maria. Over to you.
Hi. Hi. Lovely, lovely presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So,
my question is perhaps more kind of like classroom centered and more to do with practicalities in the classroom and how I view mediation. It's just that it's well, the way I look at it is like putting, you know, the ball in my students, the students' court, you know, passing the ball onto this. I just have a kind of this feeling that when we use mediation, we're giving more protagonism to the students, and also the responsibility of generating a discourse, and also the chances to speak more, and at the same time that, you know, improving their style, and while they exchange the information with the other students. But I'm thinking, which is like I see, you know, mediation as giving students much more responsibility for their learning.
I think it comes back...
Giving the responsibility to the student.
Yeah, I think it comes back to how we can use mediation in an authentic way to reflect language use in L1 and very definitely L2 in the real world. My advice to you in terms of being able to produce activities which give that greater responsibility and authenticity to your learners would be to go to Appendix 6 of the CEFR 2018, the companion volume. What it very nicely does is it lays out a whole series of mediation activities which occur in the real world. And you look at them and you think, okay, what level of my students? And go to the CFR mediation descriptors for that particular level, and then see how you can adapt those scenarios to work in your classroom. So do you teach general English, EAP? What age, what kind of English are you teaching at the moment?
I teach different levels. I teach English as a foreign language, okay, to foreign students, of course. And of course, I have different levels, several levels, of course, it varies. And from what I've just been listening to, it's just, well, I see, well, I can have this feeling that mediation is, well, it encourages more independence in the students as well. Perhaps I'm not explaining myself properly, or the way I see the best way how to use mediation in the classroom.
I think, as I say, root this in something that is authentic and root it into the contextual requirements of the students themselves. So, you know, if they're preparing for an exam, maybe KET, PET, Cambridge First, actually what you've got there is already mediation type activities in the interactive tasks in the speaking exam. If you're preparing students for IELTS and IELTS Task 1 writing, they're already mediating a text. And perhaps if I can answer Tatiana's question about an explanation of mediating a person compared with mediating a text or an idea, if I can answer these two questions and your point at the same time. So Tatiana, if you're familiar with the IELTS Task 1, where the students are given a visual set of data, a table, a graph, a map, students mediate that text. They don't hear a person, there isn't a person involved. They write a summary report of a graph. So they're mediating text. If you ask a student to write a summary of a passage or two passages, as occurs in the Cambridge C2 proficiency exam, there you are mediating two texts into a simplified, shorter summary. Mediating a person, I could take a point made by Gabby and I could re-explain it to the rest of you. Or better still, if you found that today's presentation was interesting, next time you're in your staff room, physical or virtual, you might say, oh, I attended an interesting presentation the other day given by Neil Harris and gallery teachers. And this is what was said about mediation. There you're mediating me. In terms of mediating an idea, I think you're absolutely right. This is quite difficult to get your hold of, because how do you divorce an idea from the way in which it's delivered, be it by a person or through a text? But for example, if my focus is on the theory of relativity, which I've never understood, I might say, Gabby, do you understand the theory of relativity? Can you explain it to me in simple terms, please? And there, Gabby, of course, she's mediating Einstein's text, but her real focus is not on Einstein's text, but it's on Einstein's idea. So hopefully that clarifies the point. So coming back to you, Maria, and about independence, have a look at those CFR companion volume, Appendix 6. Look at the scenarios, and if independence and responsibility is what you want, then I think you want to be working with a task-based framework and use the mediation to create meaningful tasks. Get students to, for example, look at some city guides, decide an itinerary. They're all going to the same city, but different groups have different city guides. They then present their ideas to the rest of the group, and they vote on which proposal, which, what's the word I'm looking for, which tour of their city is going to be the most popular. So there is a built-in task that encourages them to present meaningfully to one another. Great, okay. So Tatiana, does it mediation happen exclusively orally? No. Mediating, recently I remember someone giving to me a doctor's prescription, and they said, can you read this? And I was like, oh, let me have a look. I knew the doctor involved, and so I was able to say, yeah, what they're saying is that you need this, this, and this. Oh, well, what's that for? And I explained. IELTS Task 1, there's mediation of a text. A student in a content-based class studying geography, and student A and student B have both been set the same homework by the teacher, and they're in a little study group together. I'm a great fan of study groups. And student A says to student B, what's this graph about? I don't understand it. And student B says, oh, it's really simple. Think of it as I don't know, the graph is about shopping habits. And said, remember what it was like before the pandemic when we all used to go to shops, and what it's like now? They're using a metaphor. And then the student goes, oh, I get it now. So you've mediated a written text. In terms of the mediation act, you don't have to give that explanation, that clarification in speech. Imagine that I got a note from my boss saying, we had that meeting, and a couple of people said they weren't really clear about your idea for new course developments. Could you send an email round just highlighting the key ideas again? That would be mediation through writing, in this case an email. Tatiana, if you were to design an EFL course focused on mediation, what would it be like? Very good question, and I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'm not in. It's a bit like saying, would I devise a course on reading for gist? And I think probably I wouldn't, because if you're encouraging students' reading skills, the chances are that reading for gist very rarely in the real world happens in isolation. It's combined with reading for specific information. And skimming and also scanning. So I'm not sure that I would want to design an EFL course that focuses solely on mediation. What I think I would want to do is start with the students, not with the activity. And certainly if I'm devising a new course, I'm launching tonight, funnily enough, a new course in medical English for a group of Italian students at university who want to improve their English. They may go on to do the OET exam in the future. And in fact, what I'm thinking about doing is ways in which I can bring mediation into that course. But their primary focus is the development of speaking skills for medical English. So we're starting the first lesson today looking at medical ethics, and I'm going to give them a list of 7 transgressions of an ethical code, doctors who have basically behaved incorrectly, and I'm asking them to rank them in seriousness and gravity. Which of course traditionally would mean they would need the language, the functional language of agreement and disagreements. They go on to agree and disagree with one another. I could turn that into a mediation task by asking half the class to have the discussion, the rest of the class to listen to it, and then report to an external party what the findings were. So a group of 4 students discussed these 7 transgressions, and it was decided that the most serious one was the doctor falling asleep in front of his patients on a repeated basis. And this was considered to be the most grave transgression because. I'm not sure that's particularly authentic as a task. So again, I'm literally thinking off the top of my head at the moment, but the point I want to make is that I wouldn't just do mediation because I'm not sure that mediation, as important as it is, merits an entire course. I'd be much more inclined to embed it in a speaking skills and a writing skills class generally and genuinely, so that it reflects the specific needs of those specific students. Can you think of passive mediation as an option or as a companion to active mediation, like an active listener for a confused student? I'm not entirely sure, Tatiana, what you mean by passive mediation and active mediation. If you're happy to put on your microphone and clarify that for us, there you are. As an active mediation for the other members of our audience today, where you're mediating your own concepts. I'm not sure if you're available.
Would it not be a little bit like a listening comprehension? I don't know if Tatiana wants to say something now, but I understand it more passive mediation probably means listening comprehension. So you see, what happens in the classroom very often is we ask students to communicate, right, to mediate concepts and information. Say we do a role play activity, and what happens most of the time, students are only focused on their speaking.
Yes.
The moment they finish, they just switch off. They don't listen to the other person. So, so perhaps this is how Tatiana means this. So, passive mediation is effectively listening, active listening, perhaps, and listening comprehension, maybe.
I think the point I would make here is that the mediation requires the 3 elements. So as you and I have been talking, we might have asked Janice to listen to what we said. So she has, it's only at the point when we ask Janice to then repeat back to someone else our discussion, or to clarify it or to illustrate it to someone else, that I think the active mediation has taken place. Internal mediation, I mean, I think we do internal mediation, don't we?
Yeah, I think Neil, that really the thinking process is already mediation, is it not? Because this somehow links to the point I wanted to make about. I wanted to make 3 points, but now the time is limited, so I guess I'm just going to make 1 point.
Okay.
It's to do with it's a little bit, it's a little anecdote as well. I'm going to effectively talk about my life, which I hate doing, but I'm going to do it in public. So it's to do with me as a non-native speaker learning English, right? So I kind of feel that at some point in my learning process, something happened to my brain, and I kind of moved from the mode of translating from L1 to L2, translating conceptual things like big concepts or little concepts. So from the mode of translating, I think that somewhere on the subconscious level, I moved into this mode of mediating in my head. And how I mean this is that what happens with concepts is that, and that links to the point that you made about L1 in the classroom, because I feel like mediation is actually kind of moving away from your L1 and trying to understand the same concepts, but within a different social and cultural environment, perhaps.
Yes.
So this way, it's not like you have a new word or a new grammar point in the language you are learning, and then you immediately go back to your L1, to the concept that you already have in L1, and you fit this new information into your existing conceptual structure of your brain, maybe.
Yeah.
But it's the other way around. You suddenly forget about the original concepts and you learn a new concept. And this is what I refer to as mediation, which happens in my brain in this sense, because it involves a different understanding of, it's like when you think of, you see, the thing is that what Einstein said, you brought him up. What Einstein said,
Right.
if you can't explain it simply, okay, it means you don't quite understand it. So maybe I just don't understand what I'm saying, but it's more like an insight. And if you learn a new language, it involves the cultural element, it involves the social element, and it also involves the relationship between words in the given language, the logic of thinking, right? So the mediation process is probably something that happens in our brain when we learn this new language. And it's actually moving away from L1 and getting a new identity. So it's the problem of translating. Is mediation translation? Because I had a conversation with a teacher based in Germany the other day who said German teachers have this almost, simplistic understanding of mediation as translation. But I don't feel like it's the same. And that takes us again back to the use of L1 in the classroom. So it's all connected.
That's a really interesting.
Sorry, Neil.
No,
I knew
that's
that.
fascinating. Because translation, I mean, I think translation exists on many different levels. Translation can be an act of mediation, but it has those three elements involved. So someone gives me a abstract of a conference paper in German, not one of my languages. So I come to you and say, Gabby, can you translate this for me? And therefore you are my mediator across languages. It's the plurilingual space. Internal translation from L1 to L, from one language to another language that you speak both, and where you speak both languages, is that an act of mediation? Arguably it is, because if you take a text written in French and then I translate it into Italian, 3 languages that I speak, in order for the French text to be available to the Italian non-speaker of French, then what I've done is an act of mediation via translation. If I translate a text for myself from one language into another, but I don't provide it to a third person, have I mediated? I think I probably have, but in the true sense of mediation, the third element, in this case, the person is missing. So I think it's a liminal point here. And maybe that was the thing that Tatiana, where we started from, the point it was making in terms of passive mediation as active mediation. So if passive mediation, as we understand it, is simplifying, clarifying a concept or a text for ourselves. I mean, if you think about it, we encourage our students, and here I'm thinking about where I was teaching critical thinking to UK students. And I was asking them to annotate a reading text. That is arguably an act of mediation, because all I needed to do was say to them, right, now give your annotations to another person. I'll be entirely honest, I'm a bit stumped on this one, and this is where I'd like to sort of hand it back to some other colleagues of mine, to Ethan, to Ricardo, but also to people like Steve Tolk at Macmillan, and also to Tom Kiddle at Nile, all of whom are acknowledged experts in mediation, and ask them, like,
it may not even be a valid question, Neil. So I'm kind of
all
asking.
Questions are valid.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in a sense, yes. But I'm asking this because this concept of mediation, to be honest, it is one of the most fascinating things in EFL. So
yes.
So that's why. But I really feel like it goes deeper than how it's commonly understood in EFL. So
yes, absolutely.
So, yeah. So
fantastic. Well, can I say to everyone who has posted questions, the best questions, the ones that leave you thinking, I really need to go away and think about that a bit more. So I'm very grateful, Gabby, to you and to Tatiana for those very insightful questions, but also to everyone else who commented, who posted to ask questions this afternoon, because these Gallery Teacher Masterclasses, I think, are at their best when there is true dialogue and there is true interaction of ideas. So whether you posted a question or not, maybe you just had a question in your own head, that's a really useful question as well. To all of you, thank you very much indeed for joining Gallery Teachers, for joining me, Neil Harris, talking about mediation today, and may I wish you all very well. And as I say, as my parting shot, go and talk to someone else about what you heard today, because there you are, doing a wonderful activity of mediation. And we all know what they say. If you want to learn something, learn how to teach it. Thank you all very much indeed. Bye-bye.